All right, folks. Well, without further ado, my name is Valerie Moore. I am the president-elect for SLA Illinois, and I am here with some folks from Chicago Area Archivists to co-host an event called the Accidental Archivist. And I am here to put in a plug for SLA Illinois. If you like this sort of programming, we don't always co-host, but we host events about once a month. And we offer some wonderful camaraderie and other opportunities. I'll drop our website into the chat so that you will have that if you're interested in learning more. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. We'll introduce her organization, and then we'll introduce our moderator, and we'll get started.
Hi, thank you, Valerie, for that. I appreciate it. And sorry to Alexa C, who I accidentally just pinned. I was trying to pin our panelists, but that did not work. Was not trying to put you on the spot, but welcome from Chicago Area Archivists. We are happy to be able to present this panel with, in combination and collaboration with SLA. I would like to mention a couple of things. One, that I will be moderating the chat. So if your questions are apropos to the conversation that's happening right now, then I might jump in. If not, we will collate the questions and we will address them at the end of the session. And to note about the title, Accidental Archivist, I wanted to let you know that that title is referenced to our attendees and that our panelists are a combination of accidental archivists, loner rangers, and accidental records management. So I will also drop our Chicago Area Archivists website in the chat. Feel free to ask me any questions about CAA. Our programming is a mixture of members only and as well as open, so open to any other librarian or archivist organization within the Metro Chicago area, and we hope to see you soon. And now, take it away, Julie.
Hello, everyone. I am actually a member of both SLA and CAA, and I can vouch for them both as fantastic organizations. If you are not already a member, I highly recommend looking into joining. Totally worth it. And the gatherings are always good, whether it is a joint effort or individual. So I am the manager of the corporate library and archives at Shure Incorporated. I am an accidental archivist. I started with Shure as a librarian in 2008 and had the archives added to my duties in 2010. I have learned a lot on the job, as I imagine all of you have or will. So with us today to talk about their experiences, we have Becca Smith and Drew Davis. Becca is a librarian and archivist with Wisjani Elsner Associates. Her pronouns are she, her, hers. Becca received her BA in History and Women's Studies from Avila University, her MLIS from Dominican University in 2012. She's been a certified archivist since 2013, and she finished an MBA from Midway University in 2018. She has experience in a number of libraries and archives, including work for the Missouri Historical Society, Chicago Academy of Sciences, Women in Leadership Archives, and UIC Daily Library. She's been working at Wisjani Elsner Associates, a forensic engineering firm, for the past 10 years, as one of 2 librarians on staff and the only archivist. Excuse me. Drew is the manager of policy and corporate records at the College of American Pathologists, and his pronouns are he, him. Drew was recently promoted to manager of policy and corporate records at the College of American Pathologists. But from February 2016 through June 1st of this year was the CAP Archivist and Records Manager. Prior to that, he was assistant manager of the Motorola Solutions Corporate Archives in Schaumburg, Illinois from 2011 to 2016, and was an archivist at the Alabama Department of Archives History, which is his home state, from 2008 to 2011. There he processed the gubernatorial records of George C. and Lurleen B. Wallace. So now that you know who we all are for today, I'm going to get into some questions. So I've got questions for the two panelists, but we have time for Q&A afterwards, so you can direct questions to either or both of the panelists, to me, or just general CAA or SLA or accidental archives or accidental anything questions. So the first question I'm going to throw out there is, as a loan arranger, what were some of the things that ended up in your lap that you were not expecting when you were hired? And why do you think those things ended up with you and not with someone else at your organization? So Becca, we'll start with you, or Drew. I don't know if either of you want to jump in first.
I mean, I can jump in. A lot of things kind of just randomly show up whenever things come up. I think the volume of the support that's been needed through like different departments and having to help, kind of fill in the gaps with corporate history knowledge, because we're starting to lose some of our older staff after 65 years of being in business. I just kind of, I didn't realize I guess the amount, like the volume of how much they would need me to provide information on staff milestones or any of those kinds of things. Also, they'll come at me with antiquated technology help. So yes, last past week, they came up with some floppy drives, trying to figure out if I could help them with that as well. And of course, I did. And, because the library for WGE, we've had a library since the beginning of the company, and we are always super quick to respond, and they rely so heavily on us that it's just pretty much, trying to figure out how to balance all of that and trying to get all of that information out to everybody as quickly as possible.
Do you feel like it's your department's reputation as providing those services that is one of the biggest reasons why people come to you with things that don't necessarily seem like they would fit in the direct scope?
Oh, absolutely. We're the highest rated department in the company, and with just two of us, and we respond usually within under 5 minutes. So now they're kind of spoiled. and they really love being able to rely on us for any kinds of stuff, and they're really excited to get to know more about the company history. So I'm really kind of pushing for IT to give me that portal site so I can, get it out to them even better.
Nice. So Drew, how about you?
Yeah, so when I interviewed at the College of American Pathologists in 2016, it was a loan arranger position, and they did advertise it as an archivist and records manager position. But when I interviewed, I really interviewed strictly as an archivist, and they said to me, there's records management duties, we'll expect you to pick those up as you work on the job once I was hired. And when I started, the previous archivist actually still works here. And so I spoke with that person about records management, and I asked them, how much time did you spend on this? And they said, very, very little, like 5 to 10%. It's not a big part of the job. The longer I worked here, the more I realized that this needs to be a bigger part of the job. And so since I've been here, records management has grown and grown into scope where it's a big chunk of my job. And as was previously mentioned, I was promoted. That part of the job came with me. So I actually ended up keeping the records management part of my job. As for the second part of the question, why was that part of the archives position? I think that being one archivist in a large organization, the profile was not as high. And so they thought it was a way to help bolster the position by kind of tying them together, by adding more duties to it. And so over time, we've worked to kind of raise the profile of the archives, and that's why we thought it was a good time to move records management out of that.
Okay. So do you feel like the expansion of the records management duties was largely because you proactively saw the need, or do you think it was the company that realized they needed it more?
It was me. It was me. The more I looked over some of the items, I realized we had some work to do. And so I drove that.
Okay. In order to do that, do you feel like you had leverage because you'd been at the organization for a while? And I'm thinking, like, if someone steps into a position and they see that this is a need right away, but they don't necessarily have the history with the organization, how do you think that someone should go about addressing that?
Well, first and foremost, if there is a problem, alert your supervisors, let them know, like, there's an issue here, because you'll want to build stakeholders around that. When I started here, I started small. I started like a mini records management audit, which is basically a form that I sent out for people to fill out. And while in theory it would have worked, it wasn't very successful because people, when they have a form, they just fill it out without really reading it. And so when we took another stab at it, we actually did a real larger, more complex audit where we recruited people from around the organization to interview staff on their record keeping practices. And I think that talking to a real human being, people are a little more forthcoming and put a little more thought into it. So it took a little time to get to that point though. Like I said, I started small with the forms. And then when we realized that didn't really work, I went, got stakeholder input, actually took it to our executive team and said, this needs to be an organization-wide effort. And you're right, I had been here 6 years. So I'd been at 5 years by the time that we actually got to that point.
All right. So I guess a follow-up question for both of you. It sounds like what you've been able to accomplish has been due to relationship building, building the reputation of your department, building the reputation of yourself. How do you think that someone would best go about that if they're working in either a completely virtual or a more distributed environment? So I imagine that for both of your organizations, you're probably seeing that in your workspaces too, especially if there's only one of you.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the opportunity comes to you. Sometimes so for me, what helped was we had an anniversary. We had our 75th anniversary, and the leadership decided to work on a book that needed input from people all around the organization. And so, well, I wish I could take credit and say, I decided to do all this for the anniversary. It kind of came to me, but that helped. So I think looking for those opportunities where you can kind of insert yourself into the discussion. And so if you overhear, oh, so-and-so's doing this, and you are the archivist and you have something that has historical context, give them a cold call and say, hey, I know you're working on this. Do you think these materials would be beneficial in providing context?
We had this very similar issue. Like a few years before I started the company, we had the 50th anniversary of the company, and that's what started the archives. So Penny had put a call out to the whole company and said, give me everything you got, and which kind of got a little crazy. There is no provenance in our archives, but they kind of tried to do that because they wanted to publish a book of the 50, best projects that we'd done over the course of the history of the company. And they wanted to do all this stuff. Marketing didn't have enough stuff in their their archive or whatever. So Penny basically went around to, call from every unit across the country, give us everything you got. And then when I got brought on, she made it very apparent before I got hired that she did not want the archives, that it was going to be my baby. But I also had more experience in archives, prior to that anyway, so it made more sense.
That sounds like it could be very overwhelming, and people just leave boxes of things at your doorstep with no note, no nothing, right?
Yeah, that's like every month. Anytime anybody retires, I get a massive pile of everything. And be it for the library or the archives, I just actually went through 3 different people's retirement stuff so far this month. So it's been fun.
I've been there. It's interesting.
It's a permanent backlog.
Yeah, I forget where I visited. Someone was measuring their backlog in terms of Sears Towers, as in if you stacked it all on top of each other, that's how tall it would be. So I figure as long as I'm under 1 Sears Tower, I'm probably okay. It's all relative. So I guess kind of related to those questions, and I will let you pick which one of you would like to answer this first. Which knowledge gaps stood out the most for you, and what kind of training did you pursue, formal or otherwise, to help you fill those gaps?
Well, I can go first. Because the knowledge gaps, biggest thing is just keeping up with like the different technologies and trying to make sure that you're up to date on what's the best policies and practices. For what I did training wise, obviously webinars and conferences are a really great way to just get an understanding of what everybody else is going through and learning what they've learned from. For the digital stuff, I actually did the digital power workshop. I don't know if anybody's heard of that one. I think it was at Northwestern when I went, but I can send the link once I find it. It's been really helpful. It gave a kind of a breakdown of all the tools that are available for archiving digital assets and what's available for price or for free, and what they do and how they, how, I guess, broad they help you. So you kind of have like a nice workshop with that where you get to kind of hands-on see how those work. And then obviously, doing prior internships and practicums prior to, and getting the certified archivist, that kind of helped as well.
Sounds like digital power just giving you that landscape so you know what's out there is really valuable, because it's so hard to, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, the tool, getting to know what tools are available to you and at what price point, because you never know what your budget is. So it's really nice just to see what they do and they have a chart where they'll show you like the differences between them. So it's really great.
Nice. Andrew?
Yeah, so I'll actually speak to a point earlier in my career. I did mention, I inherited records management duties. That certainly was a knowledge gap that I've worked to fill through workshops, et cetera. But to me, the biggest knowledge gap I experienced in my career was when I went from the Alabama Department of Archives and History to Motorola Solutions. So ADAH, I was one of like 30 archivists, and I was a very specialized, I was like a processing archivist. When I went to Motorola, I was one of two. It was the manager, and then I was the assistant manager. And in addition to that, I'm going from an institution that is basically there to serve researchers. It's open, to one that is a corporation. It's a closed archives. Most people at the company didn't even know what the archivists do. There were some people who thought we were glorified file clerks. They didn't really know. And so the knowledge gap there was, how do I succeed, as an introvert? I'm an introvert. How do I succeed in an organization where you have to be an extrovert, because you have to be constantly advocating for the archives and explaining what you do and the value you bring to the company? And that really made me have to get out of my comfort zone. And what really helped was being involved with the Business Archives Colloquium through SAA. Because most of them, most of them are loan arrangers, and most have been in that kind of position. And they actually host a workshop. I don't know if they still host it, but they did for a long time. I'm not sure if it eventually wrapped up. And Becca and I actually attended together back in 2012. Yep. And that was like the most useful workshop I attended, because it told you basically like, here's how you do an elevator speech. Here's how you advocate. Here's how you, manage expectations for people who may ask for the world and you don't have it. In addition, every year they do a colloquium at the SAA meeting, and I always try to attend. And I think now they're doing it virtual, and it's just so useful because they focus on an aspect of business archives that more often than not really meshes with loan arranger. It's like one and the same as being a loan arranger. And there are plenty of people who are not corporate archivists who attend the Business Archives Colloquium for that reason, because it meshes so well with being a loan arranger. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend, even if you're not, and they welcome people who are not business archivists.
Yeah, it sounds like the skills that you learn there are definitely applicable in a really wide variety of settings. Yeah. And I've been to those colloquia, and I will heartily agree with that. I think that MAC also has done a business archives symposium for a couple of days in advance of their annual conference before. That's been really good. Yeah, having to learn how to do those elevator speeches is really challenging. I think that introverts, there seems to be a high proportion of introverts that gravitate towards this profession. And it's not that you don't like to talk to people, it's just that it's exhausting. And especially when you're a lone arranger, like it's just you. If anything is going to get done, it's going to be done by you. So yeah, self-care could be a subject of an entirely different multi-day webinar. We won't get into that, but yeah, seek out any and all help that you can find. So many associations can offer so much in that regard.
And the BAS, the Business Archives section, really does help with all of that, because it just, being in a corporate archives, you kind of end up having to be part marketing too, even though that's not the department I'm technically in, but it's, you know, you just kind of feel like you always have to just constantly, you know, put yourself out there. It's disconcerting sometimes when you just want to be in the library and archives.
No, I definitely understand that. I ended up getting access to my digital asset management system because I was nosy and was eavesdropping at a trade show on our marketing team who were talking about this brand new great tool that they were going to be using. And I realized I could use that. So I just started emailing people. They're not people that I'd worked with on a regular basis before, but you do what you have to, right? The worst that someone can do is just say, no, we can't help you with this. But in my case, I ended up getting access to a digital asset management system that I'm not fully utilizing because I'm one person and don't have time to digitize everything. But yeah, it was just that getting out of your comfort zone and kind of doing the elevator speech equivalent to explain why you need a resource. I mean, it could get you something wonderful.
I mean, I've been doing that for the past few months, and I'm almost getting Preservica soon. So we'll see.
Congratulations.
We'll see how it goes.
So yeah, if you are just starting out in an organization, make friends with your IT department, because they will be a huge assist in most projects that you would like to get off the ground. Make friends with your facilities department if you are working in a particular building, because that is also a great group to know and have on your side. But yeah, you have to be ready to present your case to all of these people. So
Well, especially with facilities, you can kind of maybe try and find that extra room that nobody is using that you can hidey hole some stuff in. So,
oh yeah, I have stuff all over my building. And I'm working from a place where I don't usually work because I had a bunch of things in offsite storage that facilities moved out of offsite storage and parked in a room, and they're waiting for me to go through it. So rather than just throwing it out, because I have that relationship with them, they're letting me figure out what it is first before it gets disposed of, which is great. So do we have any questions at this point from anyone in the audience about either of the two sort of general discussion topics that have been brought up?
There are none in the chat. Let me see. Feel free to raise your hand if you've got any questions, or unmute if you would like.
Yeah, we've got almost 80 attendees, which is amazing.
Does subject knowledge of your organization also figure into the learning curve?
Absolutely. I think so, because when you're a lone arranger, you really have to build that, not only become the subject matter expert, but build the reputation of being the subject matter expert. So people come to you. It's almost kind of like a feedback loop. The more knowledgeable you are, the more people come to you for information you need, which helps build your program, because it helps give you leverage to say, hey, we're doing all this. We need more resources to continue providing these services and more. And so definitely, if you started an organization where you're a lone arranger, you know, I think, and I don't know if this is kind of a common sense thing or not, but ask, like, are there histories I can read? Are there, you know, do you have like base, you know, policies and guidelines I can go through like before I start? So I come in on day one, ready to kind of dive in.
For me, I actually had to basically learn most of the history through processing the archives. You know, obviously you can get as much history as what's on in the book that we wrote or anything on their little, you know, baby history page on the portal. But most of it is from while I was processing the archives. And we did have a good amount of early on, the staff would do oral histories with anybody leaving the company. And that one of the founder of the company actually wrote out an early history, like narrative, So that was really helpful to kind of flesh out some people's names and what jobs were really important and what they were doing to really establish themselves. But yeah, you end up becoming like the source for the history of the company. Just not that long ago, even the president of the company, who's been with us since 1979, didn't even know about the founder's brief history narrative that was written. And so he was very excited that I'd been keeping all of that stuff and you know, providing it to anybody who wanted it.
That's terrific. I mean, we've seen companies who have been around for a very long time that place a high value on their history and do a lot to promote it. And there's a huge benefit to them for doing it in terms of, you know, recognition or overall feeling. If it's a corporate organization that sells something, you know, you want to give your potential consumers kind of that warm fuzzy feeling that you care enough about this to preserve it and keep it, and it's important to you as an organization. So for those of you who might be working at younger organizations or places that haven't considered this yet, it's, I think, valuable to all organizations to understand where they came from, because it helps you figure out where you're going, right? So see, we've got a couple of questions that chat here.
So are either or any of our panelists, including our moderator, involved in disaster response planning?
So our archives has an emergency response plan that takes some items from the overall disaster recovery plan, but I'm not part of the overall disaster recovery plan. But in our emergency response plan, we do have several people identified that would take on roles if there was a disaster, and we update that every year. And there's like a list of supplies on it. Some of them are maintained in the archives, some are maintained in other parts of the building, and we just check and make sure, are they all still there?
We don't really have the archives and the library don't really get involved in the disaster planning. Most of my archives is unfortunately kind of just in a corner because that's the space they gave me. So I have them in, cabinets, but I mean, there's limited amount of what I can do disaster planning wise until they actually give me a permanent space.
Yeah, in my case, I'm not involved at the planning level, but again, because I've cultivated that relationship with our facilities department, I can kind of keep the archives on their radar as far as things that might go wrong. Knock on wood, nothing happened yet.
Excellent. What is your relationship to local historical societies?
We're a closed archives. It's a corporate archives. You can't, our information stays with the staff only. It doesn't go out.
Fine.
I think for me right now, it's kind of officially in the same boat. We are closed to the public, but the history of a microphone company is of interest in terms of people who are doing research into industrial engineering or into manufacturing in Chicago. And we've been trying to wrap our heads around ways to possibly promote more of my company's history and content to people outside the organization. But it's a challenge when you're not open to the public for research. And especially if you are a lone ranger or part of a very small staff, the demand that would be placed on you if all of a sudden the public knew they could, contact you and ask for information, it would be overwhelming. So it's a challenge that I imagine we are not unique in trying to address it. If anybody has experience in being a basically closed collection, but also being open for, being contacted for research, I'd love to hear how you're managing that.
A lot of emails.
Yeah,
we take for us, it's just like, it depends on if somebody comes back to us like outside of the company and asking something about historically related, it depends on what it is. Like if they're looking for an old report from a job that, they are connected to, we might be able to provide it to them. But that's the other thing is most of our reports are confidential as well. So it just varies based on what exactly they're looking for.
Great. Hi, Becca and Drew. What were the main challenges you have encountered when you were processing various types of collections? For example, unidentified photographs, inaccurate information about the origin of collections, and so on. Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in first if that's okay, Becca. Because my challenge has not been identifying materials. Usually materials that come in are identified. If not, we've been lucky because we've had some staff that have been here like 45 years and the organization is 75 years old. So most people actually still know most folks in photographs. More the challenge I faced as a lone arranger is getting people to transfer materials to the archives that should be. We produce a lot of council and committee minutes that should come to the archives, and sometimes you have to be in this position of almost nagging people to give materials to you that have not been, but in a way that is not too annoying, and it's kind of a delicate tightrope to walk. And making sure that's coming into the archives, because that it actually is like the core of the collection. That's what's referenced most.
Yeah, we had a similar situation where most of the board of directors meetings, minutes and everything weren't coming to the archives, and I went downstairs and took them. It's like they were just sitting in a cabinet and I'm like, okay, these are done. But the other ones, when I got there, pretty much everything was not identified. There was no labels on photographs. They had no idea what project things went to, like everything like that. So it was just a matter of crowdsourcing with the staff that had been there and knew people. So I went through and, found people who could identify certain things. And we did a history mystery thing throughout our newsletter where we would just put random unidentified photos or things like that up and have people give us some reference and hopefully more details than just names, like what was going on with that. And then of course, there's always the fun challenges of scanning in slides and negatives and, all of those kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, granted, I do not have formal archival education. Most of my coursework has been in libraries, is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. That a lot of what gets done when you are a lone arranger, it does not have to be perfect. It has to be enough. You just need to learn your patron base, right? Learn who your customers are and what they need. And if things aren't done exactly to specifications that are written out in archival standards, that's okay.
Oh yeah, we don't even have any provenance, so I mean it's not anything that follows a CA guideline, but just have to set realistic expectations and do your best.
Excellent. Do your organizations have knowledge management functions? If not, how do you feel your roles contribute to that function, especially around corporate knowledge?
Our company has a knowledge sharing department, which the library and archives are under. Mostly my coworker, Penny, is the one that takes care of the knowledge management functions. I maintain more of the library and the archives.
Yeah, the archives of the CAP is part of the knowledge management function too. You have the archives and the corporate library, or the medical librarian, and technically the records management function, even though that was with my role. So you had all three of those kind of under the umbrella, and the medical librarian kind of handled like helping people with citations, external reference requests that were not archives related, and copyright. And then I would handle all questions related to CAP history.
Yeah, it sounds like the division of duties gets a little fuzzier when you are a smaller staff.
Mm-hmm.
Drew, read the disaster response plan. Have you pushed for you and the archives to be included in your organization's plans?
So not really. And the reason for that is because the people who are in on the planning of the archives emergency response plan are also the people who manage the company-wide. And also the archives emergency response plan is published in the same location as the overall one. I think the larger one refers to the CAP emergency response plan. But I did want to have like a specific broken out emergency response plan for the archives, because it's easier to update that than going through the process of updating the larger plan.
Excellent. Regarding the local history societies question, do you know if the local libraries and historical societies may have non-archival historical materials that mention your companies?
Everywhere in Northbrook probably has our company mentioned somewhere. We've been around for a very long time.
I don't believe so. Not anything that, I mean, unless it's something that we've published. I mean, we produce a professional or a peer-reviewed journal, and we also have a periodical that goes out. So it's possible that some of our published materials may end up in other archives, but our internal records, no, I don't believe so.
All righty. IBM Archives in one session described that they have an assigned staff member for answering research reference questions from the public for similar scenarios as what Julie described, as an added comment.
IBM has a much bigger budget than my company does. It would be so nice to have it.
Have any of you had experience getting older digital files from your marketing department move over to the archive?
Marketing just let me copy them over, and then we share a video archive that they have access to, and I've just threatened them to make sure they don't delete it. But other than that, yeah, I just had to copy them all over to the archives. They didn't want to get rid of them.
Yeah, for us, our marketing department was kind of behind. We were actually getting paper stuff from them up until recently. They not too long ago got a digital asset management system that they've been uploading their material to. And I just grabbed items out of that I think need to come to the archives. We have gotten other materials from around the organization that were on CD. And I think somewhere in the backlog is some floppy disks. But with the CD materials, we've tried to move them over off the CD to, our digital archives.
Yeah, I've just transferred all of our CDs, but we still have a ton of floppy disks, zip disks, and VHS tapes from all of our different various videos that the companies produce. So that's my next process of converting all of those.
Great. Alex mentions that they also have the same problem with unidentified photos and such as a lone arranger. So thank you. Valerie, not from SLA presenter mode, indicates that they started as a librarian at their museum, putting the collection into a computer database, and then inherited the archives department. Now they spend half their time returning phone calls and answering email requests while still trying to update and correct the archives database. I'm not sure if there was a question or if you were just commiserating with, if I am incorrect, I haven't scrolled all the way down, so I'm not sure, but thank you for sharing. That is definitely something I think we all have felt. So next question is, are there any tips or advice for someone who is considering getting in MLIS to find library or archivist assistant type roles to get experience in the field before pursuing further any education, any networking events?
One thing I would suggest, and I don't know how possible that is around here, but checking with some local archives and seeing if there's an opportunity to volunteer and do like basic processing work. I know way back when I was at the State Archives in Alabama, they had a robust volunteer program, and they actually had people who came in for a year. A lot of them were retirees, but they had other folks too, where they would come in and process collections and do data entry and stuff like that. And there were some folks who like had the skill of like an entry-level archivist by the time I got there. who were not trained as archivists. You know, they just had volunteered that long. And so asking around to see, is it possible that you could just volunteer for a little while and kind of shadow?
I've done that before too. I mean, it's where my work at the Missouri Historical Society came. It was a volunteer internship position that I wasn't in school. I just wanted to do it. So that the same, you know, working at the National Archives when I was doing that in my undergrad, you know, they'll take volunteers. Missouri Historical, you know, like the historical societies love volunteers. I know in Chicago, the Chicago Academy of Sciences always has a slew of volunteers to help process their archives. And so, yeah, you can easily try and contact them or just keep an eye out when they're looking for those kinds of internships.
And as far as networking events, we are planning a series of networking events, at least on the Chicago area archivist side, and you would always be welcome. Next question, have you ever worked with born digital collections, and do you have any suggestions how to process and maintain them?
I
Becky,
mean,
you want to go first?
a lot
I don't
of,
want to jump in. I have an answer, but I don't want to.
go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So yes, my advice, if you're a loan arranger and you have a born digital collection, is don't get caught up in what like the best practices are. Do what you can. Just do something. Okay, if that is just moving it to a file share and checking to make sure that the same amount of files and in data moved over, then that's okay, because you're basically kind of constrained to what your resources are. I know I went to some digital workshop once where, you know, they had the whole process of, you know, you have to do this and then you have to create the SIP and the DIP and all this. And, you know, when you get down to like actual practice, sometimes that's not feasible if you're a loan arranger. And so just, you know, moving items to your file share and making sure that it's secure, that no one can access it, and checking that it's backed up, you know, that is a bare minimum, and that's okay if that's what you can do. There's also tools you can use. Like I use the Fixity tool, which is free. That's, you know, open source, and you can use that to run checksums on file directories and just see how they've changed since the last time you ran the report. You can see how many files are added, removed, anything's changed, corrupted. And I actually have noticed stuff before where we got moved to like a different server and the report was all different. I was like, what happened? And our IT department was like, oh yeah, we moved you to another server. And I'm like, that's news to me. That's, you know, so, but yeah, you know, getting back to the start is certainly certainly look for opportunities to train on what best practices are for managing born digital records, but don't beat yourself up if you can't do those best practices to the full extent. You know, look at it as an opportunity to see what are they presenting that I can do? You know, because nobody's going to come in and judge you. I won't come in and judge you. So
I won't either.
Yeah.
If you don't have an MLIS background, I would definitely check out, while it applies to when it was written more physical collections, but definitely check out the more product, less processing article that is out there that might help you. And Josh, there are also in the chat some other suggestions of places to look for volunteering and getting your hands wet, so to speak. So we prefer them to be dry if you are working with archives. For physical archives, what do you do when you have a staff member who is a hoarder and wants to keep everything, including multiple copies of items that don't really have value?
Is this person asking to transfer it to the archives, or are they just hoarding it in their desk? I think is my question. If they're trying to transfer it to the archives, I think you set clear expectations.
Archives. Transferring to the archives.
Okay, then you set clear expectations with Adida. You do a transfer agreement and you set clear expectations on, I probably won't maintain everything, and just ask them, do you want it back, or do you care if we throw it away? And then when you accession it, you just identify, like, is there anything we want to keep? What do we not need to keep? And Yeah, I think having that clear expectation so they don't come back at some point. They're like, why'd you throw out this random thing? It's like, well, we didn't have historical value.
Jennifer, I would jump in to say that regardless if you are in a supervisory position or not with this person, that maybe like Drew mentioned, setting clear expectations of what is coming into the archives will help that even if you're in a lateral, if they're on the same organizational line as you, and that you could, if you've got a good relationship with your supervisor, pull that in to reinforce what your accession policies are.
Yeah, I was gonna point to policies as well as a good way to enforce that.
And
Yeah.
let's see.
Yeah, your retention schedule is your friend there, because you can point to the retention schedule and say, you gave me all of this, and per the retention schedule, half of it should have been thrown out. So that's also a tool to look back on.
Elizabeth Morris points out that dam systems definitely require different permissions for assets, and making the dam manager a crucial role in relation to, I believe, our conversation about Born Digital and managing Born Digital assets. Have you ever had to produce records that are subpoenaed?
I mean, I have for like from the library, because we have a lot of our staff are expert witnesses for different, buildings that fall down kind of things. But none of the archives have.
So I'll answer this very carefully. If you're in a position where you get subpoenaed, if your law department asks for the entire collection, do not be afraid to push back and say, I need a date range and I need a specific search term, and do not provide them more than what they're asking for. If they say, we want to see this, don't go, I also thought this would interest you. Be very, give them exactly what they're asking for. No more.
No less.
No less, no more, no less. Yeah.
That is a fantastically diplomatic answer.
Cindy Starr mentions that they made a rule that there would be no more than 2 copies of any items in the archive boxes, that they are currently going through some papers and they are finding 40 copies of some things. Wow, that is a lot. And our thoughts are definitely with you.
I've just deaccessioned all of those kinds of things, just nope. I'll very important things I'll keep 3 copies of. After that, I'm out.
Elizabeth Morris points out that she's got puts in her contact information if you're interested in volunteering, and has more information on that. Thank you very much. Yes, lots of recycle, I imagine. We have 9 minutes left, so if there are any last minute pressing questions, please feel free.
I do have a last question for our panelists.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I will then mute myself.
And they may not have anything to add, but it's in addition to what we've discussed here in the Q&A and in the previous questions. Do you have any tips or recommendations to give someone who has just been handed surprise responsibilities at their organization?
I'd say definitely keeping a line of communication open and set realistic expectations. Make sure everybody knows what's going on and be flexible. And that's patient. It's a lot for one person to take on.
And I mean, going back to what I previously said, if you inherit duties that you're not trained in, do not be afraid to join the professional organizations for those duties. So again, like I joined ARMA. I'm not trained as a records manager. And I also don't be afraid to go on listservs and just out cold and ask questions, push yourself out of your comfort zone. Because I've done that before, where I've had kind of a general records management question where I'm like, I don't know really how to do this. And people have contacted me and set up calls and talked me through it. And they're always willing to help. People in this kind of sphere of work love to help their colleagues. And people will gladly do it. So don't be afraid to go to those organizations and reach out to those people for help.
Or taking any courses or webinars, and if you have it in
Mhm.
your budget for your company to pay for you to get that education or that
Yeah.
certification.
Thank you. Yeah, that too, definitely.
Yeah, there are a lot of good low cost and no cost options that are going to be available through all kinds of professional associations. Definitely take advantage of those. Librarians are helpers. Erin is right.
And archivists are definitely helpers, but they would prefer to do it via email or text, not in person. No. Are there any last questions? Going once, going twice? If there are not, we will give you back 6 minutes of your afternoon, and thank you so very much for joining us.
I second that, thanks. We're really glad to have all of you guys here, and you have a terrific rest of your week.